Welcome to Hidden Agenda, a post-revolutionary game set in a fictional country called Chimerica, which I think I've read someone say is a fusion of Chile, Mexico, and America. Well, Central America in general. Or no, this is Costa Rica. That's where the Rica comes from, so it'd be like Chimerica. I don't know. You play as the interim president that has been installed in power after a revolution has deposed Farsante, the dictator that used to be in charge of Chimerica. And this guy pisses everybody off. So he was a despot that extorted the workers, the farmers, and all the lower classes. But I mean, you're going to get that when you're, a dictator. But his huge misstep is that he started abusing the army and mistrusting them, and he placed all of his power in his own personal guard. So the army even deserted him, and when you lose the army, you kind of lose a lot of the support that keeps you in power. So there was a coup led by a guerrilla force and also the army who had turned against him. 6 months before he was deposed, the U.S. had stopped backing him, so he had no defenses, got overrun, the usual. You have 3 years after you are installed to try to turn the country around and navigate the political process and make sure that everybody is decently taken care of. Maybe stave off some coups of your own if you piss off the wrong people. All right, I will explain anything that happens as it pops up. Let's begin. Also, it has been forever since I've last recorded myself, so I can tell I'm not on top form, but you gotta start somewhere, so let's go. All right, I'm going to be Zilla, Manila, Davila. With completion of a formal signing-in ceremony, your term as Presidente of Chimerica will officially begin. Please sign the official form and get ready for your first press conference. This is an old DOS game from 1988. It was still in the Cold War, so we're going to see a lot of Cold War elements play out during the game. A crowd of reporters presses toward you. Presidente Manila, one calls. There has been much talk recently of the need for justice. Which of these will be your most important in achieving a more just society? All right, we can protect the citizens from violent repression, eliminate government corruption, and ensure free distribution of information. Now, these three options each represent one of the three parties that are going to be in play in your new coalition. Protecting citizens from violent repression is a tenet of popular stability. The more right-leaning party, which is honestly a little fascist, and I'm not really in love with them, so probably not going to do that. Even though, all of these are important, but they matter to different parties in different amounts. And really, this whole press conference doesn't really matter much. It might set the tone and maybe put some favor in your pocket from certain parties. So you get 3 of these questions and 3 of these answers. So, what am I going to pick? I always like to go for eliminate government corruption because it seems like something nobody could really get mad at. And eliminating corruption eliminates waste and helps streamline all of your systems. Like, your revenue will go up if you pursue eliminating corruption because corruption drains the system. Ensuring free distribution of information is a tenet of NL is national liberation. They're the left wing of the government, and they're modeled after the Sandinistas, but they have a different, hero rather than Sandino in this one. And they're the ones I tend to align with. If you know my policies as a person, left-leaning is definitely my jam. Now, eliminating government corruption may be the tenet of Christian reform, which is the last party. And they're a very centrist party, and that usually means that they vacillate and try to appease everybody, and they care a lot about democracy and making sure that everybody has a fair shake. They also really like capitalism, but they're more they want to put more restrictions on its use. where popular stability is like, yeah, free market, Keynes is the best economist in the world, and national liberation is very collectivist. Still, I'm going to eliminate government corruption. Another reporter pushes to the front and raises her hand. Everyone agrees that we must develop our nation's economy, but what should be the first priority of this development effort? So, promoting growth of the economy. Again, I think these are all in the same... No, they're not. They're definitely jumbled up. Promoting the growth of the economy is, I believe, Christian Reform's MO. Distributing the nation's wealth equally, definitely collectivism, definitely NL. And protecting the free movement of capital is definitely a popular stability tenet. So we're going to try to distribute the nation's wealth equitably. A third reporter raises his hand. Thank you, Presidente. One more question. Which of the following will the Manila administration work hardest to improve? So, infrastructure such as roads and utilities is kind of everybody's jam in a way, but I have a feeling that that's more the Christian Reform. Service, oh, right. So do we want to work on city dwellers or rural poor? Like, this is kind of a different question couched in economic reform. And so infrastructure is a very middle-of-the-road answer and actually can swing either way depending on where you want to focus it. You can focus on improving the market infrastructure to help you get your goods to market, or, you know, you can try to get infrastructure up into the backwoods areas and modernize your rural communities. Services for the city dwellers is going to, well, like, I actually feel like this one doesn't have a party tie because it's hard to really pin down where their support base is. NL is definitely more popular in the rural areas. I don't really know between these two which one would be Christian Reform, which one would be popular stability. But taking parties out of the equation, I kind of feel like infrastructure is the way to go because, again, kind of the same thing as corruption. Infrastructure greases the wheels of your machinations, and in the first year of your presidency, the harvest season ends and the dry season begins. There are 3 seasons in Chimerica: dry, rainy, and harvest, and your 3 years are divided into those 3 seasons, where you have, I believe, 9 weeks, and every action takes a week. So, welcome to the Office of the Presidente. You mainly have consultations and encounters as your driving force in this game. You're attempting to make policy decisions, and you have to split them between having encounters with the locals and having consultations with the cabinet. But we don't have a cabinet because we just started, and we can start appointing them through the contact list. Then there's, of course, the drawers are where you manage your game state. Before we start, I'd like to take a look at the reports and the progress charts to see what we've inherited. Where does Chimerica stand? So we have out from a year from where we've accepted the presidency. So we have a year of data under Farsante's rule. And military expenses have been running away with the country because obviously this guy's become paranoid and he's needed to fund his military to try to stave off dissidents, and that was unsuccessful because otherwise we wouldn't be here. We're also receiving military purchases and aid from the U.S. Well, we were until 6 months ago when the U.S. decided that Farsante was not someone they wanted to have installed in this area, and they tacitly supported his downfall by withholding their support. U.S. is a little crafty like that. And of course, we haven't been receiving anything from the USSR or Cuba yet, I put in parentheses. But that is an option, and this is all for the military, which will become important as time goes on. Social spending. Looks like infrastructure spending was down. Military up, infrastructure down. What does he care about the infrastructure? He's a dictator. So if you haven't seen it yet, I highly recommend CGP Gray's video about the rules for rulers, because it actually ties in a lot to how this game works. Because you do have to maintain your power and appease your power base, or the keys to power, as the video says. And that explains a lot why infrastructure spending was collapsing in the last year of Farsante's reign. There were no food price subsidies, but they can come into effect, and healthcare and education. Surprisingly, I'm actually seeing, there was that tiny uptick over the last year, and it wasn't cut. And that actually surprises the heck out of me. Infant mortality, we're in a bad state. Like, that is deplorable. We're somewhere around 175 infant deaths per 1,000 births. That's 17% of babies dying. Like, that's astronomical. Latin America is not great. The US, modern healthcare, all that junk. This is a statistic that doesn't really impact you during the game, but we're not going to ignore it, because I'd actually like to treat this as a simulation, and I will care about things that don't mechanically benefit me, because there's returns in the future, like beyond the scope of this game, and I think that that's worth trying to simulate. Land distribution. So Farsante, one of the things that he did that pissed off his support base was he seized lands from everybody and gave them to his cronies, and that pissed off the rich, landowners who he stole from, basically. So when we take power, we actually inherit all of the Farsante land, and we have to decide what to do with all of that land that we have inherited. And there's a few options, and they'll come up as we address it. But as you can see, the wealthy own a fair amount of property. I mean, it's not as bad as the US, to be honest. The other private producers own roughly 30% of the land. And then cooperatives, again, we're going to see a lot of the socialist stuff charted here, even though it's not in play yet, because it is an option that we can lean on. Food crops. There's corn and beans, and then a population statistic for how many people are essentially starving, or less than the UN standard nutritional requirements, is a much more diplomatic way to say, they're not getting the nutrition that they need. Again, this is something that, it actually does have an impact on us, but not in a direct, you have a more fed populace, so they're going to be more industrious. Instead, this impacts us in terms of trying to appease the population, because a hungry country is going to be more prone to revolt. If you can't eat, you need to change something. So feeding everybody keeps the peasants happy. And I don't say peasants disparagingly. The game calls them peasants. It's kind of a feudal system, but it's kind of not. We'll see as we go. Export crops. Cotton is being produced a lot more than coffee, but coffee fetches a higher price than cotton. And I've looked into this a little bit. It might be in the instruction manual, but evidently the reason that we produce so much cotton is because that's where all of the wealthy landowners are. And they like to produce cotton on their land and control the market. And Farsante made some concessions to them because they were wealthy and they're a key to power. So they're not... I would rather switch those two, but there's only so much we can put our thumb on the scale, and we'll see how that goes as we develop. And coffee is definitely more of our moneymaker, despite being something we don't produce enough of. And cotton, it's barely profitable as it is. So really, what do we care about the cotton producers? They're not really doing a whole lot for us. And this is all exports. We don't really domestically produce goods with the coffee. Or with the cotton. So here's our currency reserves. And it looks like when 6 months ago the U.S. withdrew their support, Farsante may have been leaning on other governments and institutional banks to get some more funding into his country, and a lot of it was embezzled. So that could also explain why our hard currency reserves are dipping. We'll try to rectify that. And again, here you can see bilateral aid from the USA cuts off about 6 months away from the presidency being usurped. In fact, all the international or different countries do not want to support Farsante. He's out of office. We'll see if we can turn some of this around. All right, there's a few press digests. They're basically, yay, the new president's here. I do want to go over, though, we have two rags in Chimerica. There's Chimerica Ahora, the Journal of Stability, Honor, and Dignity, and they're the right-leaning Fox News of Chimerica. They're very much about military and capitalism, and they're not great, in my opinion. But of course, I face a deteriorating economic structure, splintered military, shortages of food, and a potential power vacuum now that the strong hand of Farsante no longer guides the nation. Like, there's your tip, right? Like, they're still kind of supporting Farsante in a way. And searching for historical parallels, one might best compare the current situation to the fall of Haitian despot Baby Doc Duvalier in 1987. So here's a little, lead to look into for history context. I really should look up that situation because as this plays out, I actually followed almost to a T, and I learned this afterward, that my playthrough mirrored the Sandinista rebellion in Nicaragua. And I'm interested to see what the Haitian rebellion here, the fall of Baby Doc, and see if maybe if you take it in a few different directions, you can follow that script, or maybe that's just how these things played out in that time period, and it didn't really matter between Nicaragua, between Haiti, sorry, and when you depose a despot, it just plays out similarly. So then we have El Independiente, the new journalism for the new Chimerica. They're the left-wing rag, and they're also not the best, but, I mean, they're more my kind of people, but Speculation centers today on the thoughts and aspirations of one individual. In 1959, when Fidel Castro overthrew the Cuban dictator Batista, no one knew if he would turn out to be a true revolutionary or a weak-willed reformer. Today, no one can say with certainty what leadership the nation can expect from this Manila. So, it's interesting that, well, I guess that they focus on Fidel Castro, which is kind of a tip that they're a little bit more left, but they don't seem to tip their hand as much as the strong hand of Farsante. Edition Mondiale, the French newspaper, they kind of represent a somewhat left-of-center view from the international world, and they'll become important in the sense of how you are viewed internationally and not by America, which, spoil right now, USA Today is the other rag that we get propaganda from. And they can generally get you a barometer on how the IMF will view you and whether or not they will give you loans and military aid. So, not since Juan Jose Arevalo returned from exile to lead Guatemala in 1944, after the fall of the dictator Ubico has a civilian leader so little known come to play such a crucial role in the region's politics as Zilla Manila de Villa does today. Again, another interesting thing to look into. And then USA Today. The streets of Poyais become one endless parade as enthusiastic crowds demonstrated their hopes for the future by honking horns, waving banners, and joyfully traipsing through the city. The spontaneous bursts of affection reminded an observer of the enthusiasm Corazon Aquino met once Ferdinand Marcos had finally left the Philippines. So, I didn't even register, but you get 4 leads to look into on how you can kind of guide your nation after assuming power. And like, I guess you can probably follow some of the scripts of these depending on the choices that you make, the policies you implement. And it's interesting because none of them mention Nicaragua, but I have a suspicion that it's because this game came out right around the Contra affair, and it might have been a sensitive subject. Turns out that the U.S. was backing counter-revolutionaries because they didn't like what the revolution in Nicaragua brought. So we'll see if that plays out for us too. Whew. So that's a fair amount of exposition, and I do want to get into the different persons of interest and talk a little bit about their history, because this game is deep. And each of these people that you can meet with have their own like histories and agendas, but I'll just do that as they come up. I do want to see the bios for all of these different people because you get some interesting context for why they argue the things that they do. But our first order of business is to go into the contacts and start appointing people to our cabinet. And now that I think about it, there's a fair bit of information in here as well. So I'm just going to pop this up to show you the positions we have to fill. We have Agricultural Minister, Defense Minister, the Internal Affairs Minister, the External Affairs Minister. And these are the parties that you can appoint people from. And each of these have 3 people that you can appoint to the 4 positions. And here's some cool designer magic. You can't staff all 4 of your positions with one party. You are forced to take at least one member of a different party. So Christian Reform, I've kind of talked about them before, and you can read here that they are the moderates. Its appeal is strongest among the small urban middle class, so I guess that answers that, though it is also favored by elements of the coffee producers and the leadership of the Catholic Church. Then here we go. Some National Liberation Party leaders consider themselves Marxists. For others, ideas about social change are inspired by the interpretation of the Gospels known as liberation theology. Speaks for the large population of rural poor, so I had them pegged. And then popular stability. The party is supported by those army leaders who did not flee with Farsante, the cotton-growing elite, and by many less privileged Americans whose fortunes nevertheless depend on these powerful interests. So it's almost like people that, due to their obligations, are sort of forced to be in the pockets of popular stability. I don't like them much, but I do tend to want to have one of their voices on the cabinet just so that I have a hotline to appeasing the traditional keys to power, which is an important thing to keep in place. But as we'll see, depending on how I play this, that might not be all that necessary. What am I going to do is I'm going to appoint a few people that I've used before into positions that I know are good. So Gloria is National Liberation, and she's probably one of the more vocal of the National Liberation cabinet members. Okay, so what's important from this, she's got a bio up above, and I'll let you read that as you want, but down below, there's the 4 bullet points, and each of those bullet points corresponds to a position in the cabinet, and you can appoint her to one of those to try to get that issue on the docket, because the only way you can make decisions as the president is by consulting with people, either your cabinet or those people of interest that I showed before, and deciding whether or not you want to implement the policies that they suggest. If you agree with one of the 4 things that are on the bottom here, appoint them to the position, and that will be their cause, or one of the causes that they will bring up. So Gloria, I like to have as the defense minister because she's very focused on justice and bringing people, guilty of abuses into custody. And I feel like those elements do deserve to be incarcerated because they're going to be a problem if we don't. So that's why I like to have her as my defense minister. Though I do like some of her policies like increased attention to the healthcare needs of the poor. So I don't want her as external affairs because, you know, I want to try not pissing off the United States because they do some pretty shady stuff if you let them get away with it. And forceful land reform, again, so I want to have her on my cabinet, but I'm trying to find a position that she can take that upsets people the least. So she's going to be my defense minister. Also from National Liberation, I would like to take, I believe it's this guy. So I don't like I do like his non-alignment in foreign affairs. That's what I like about this guy. And you can see some commonalities, like his agricultural position is about land reform for the poorest of Chimerica, and so was Gloria in a sense, except she says forceful land reform. But let's get this guy to non-alignment, because I feel like that's important to try to keep an even keel and keep us from getting into trouble internationally. That's all I'm going to take from National Liberation, because I don't want to leave any party out of the negotiating table. So we've got 2 more positions to fill. She's got increased funding for education and healthcare as her internal affairs, which is something I like. Assistance to needy farmers is a very vague idealism, I guess. Like, what does that really boil down to? I'm all for increasing our... Well, hold on, actually. Let me look at who else we have. Protection of the rights of individuals and measures to increase production of export crops. Regaining the campesinos' trust through limited land reform. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And timely preparation for elections. You're not my dude. Sorry, dude. We're going to do protection for rights of individuals because that kind of aligns with where I want to take the country. And popular stability. Who do we want to put in charge of agriculture? These guys are all assholes, in my opinion. This guy in particular, he is the son of a cotton growing elite, and he's a rich, spoiled brat, and direct foreign investment in agriculture, no thank you. I would rather try to build up our self-sufficiency. I mean, I know from a real politics standpoint, like, we're not going to be self-sufficient, and it is important to get aid from other countries, but I don't want to be interdependent on them because they thumb the scales in Chimerica more than I'm comfortable with. So who else do we got? Modernization of methods of export agriculture production. You're okay. This guy in particular, he was part of the military in Farsante's guard, and he led the army against Farsante at a crucial juncture, it says. And I don't know how much I can trust a dude who, his only real reason for turning the tide is because he kind of read the writing on the wall. Good for you for being pragmatic, but, I need someone who's a little more, convicted. That said, modernization of methods of export is not a bad thing to have. Alright, who's our last dude? Encouragement of investment in large-scale mechanized agricultural projects. I actually don't mind this. All right, let's get this guy. I haven't actually played with this guy before. I used to rule the world. Seas would rise when I gave the word. Now I know that I'll sleep alone. Sweep the streets I used to own.